As a historian, know your history is a thing I say often to students and unwilling participants in talks that I have come to be at. Stop talking about gay Doctor Who is a thing people say to me quite often. I say, no. First of all, why would I want to stop talking about A, Doctor Who, and B, gay Doctor Who? And if you think that Doctor Who isn't pretty gay, or at least pretty queer, have we been watching the same show? I didn't have gay Doctor Who when I was growing up. When I was growing up, Oscar Wilde wasn't even gay. When we did The Importance of Being Earnest at school, we didn't talk about Oscar, his life, the fact that the handbag playwright was pretty damn gay. None of that got talked about. I often talk too about The Colour Purple and the terrible annotations in it on the book that is still on my bookshelves, but none of those notes refer to the fact of the queer storyline in The Colour Purple. None of it was part of our education. None of it was part of the stories that we were given. We didn't have the history for our community. I was never particularly angry about being queer when I was a teenager. I was fairly angry at being a teenager in the age of Leonardo DiCaprio and his stupid hair. When we did Romeo and Juliet at school, clearly I harbour a lot of resentment to my English classes at school, given this context. Nobody cared about Romeo and Juliet. They did care about Leonardo DiCaprio. The only reason we could get teenagers to do that in the 90s was to watch the Baz Luhrmann version. And while now as a grown-up theatre nerd, I concede it is a very good adaptation of the Bard's possibly most problematic love story, if it is a love story. I didn't care about Leo, his stupid hair, or frankly whether he was going to die at the end. This became an issue with Titanic as well. We're sensing a theme in childhood Leonardo DiCaprio trauma here. But as a teenager, there wasn't a culture for me. I didn't have a history, a set of pop culture, not even Oscar Wilde, who is indeed pop culture of his time, to reflect who I was. So I was mainly angry at Leonardo DiCaprio and boy bands and Joshua Jackson in Dawson's Creek somewhat irrationally, because I do see the appeal of Joshua Jackson as an adult now. I am only human. But in all seriousness, it was all boy bands and who do you fancy on this show and teenage dating drama and, you know, who was going out with who on which TV show that I really didn't care about because these people didn't look, act and feel like me. So I had boy bands and I had Joshua Jackson and yes, Leo and his stupid hair. And I wasn't trying to be not like other girls, as kids today might say. I just didn't know who I was from any of that. There's a playwright and an activist called Larry Kramer, and in one of his most famous pieces of work, The Normal Heart, there's a speech called the I Belong to a Culture speech. And in it, the character, who is based on Kramer's life and his activism, says, I belong to a culture. And he reels off a list of people. Those people include philosophers like Michael Proust, Shakespeare, yes, Oscar Wilde as well. And I was left thinking when I discovered that play, I didn't have a culture. I had boy bands and I had teen culture, but I grew up at a time when my culture was hidden from me. We didn't talk about it. Instead of rainbow bookshelves that you get in every possible bookshop today, or TV sections on your streaming service that have the rainbow flag over them, I got a culture of silence, or I got John Hurt's booming voice and falling tombstones on the TV telling you that to be gay was actually just to die. Or I got the books hidden, the subplots hidden, the stories that were in them not really talked about. And I grew up not knowing really where I came from. Of course, some of us found bits and pieces of that, either in dark corners of the early internet where we wrote our own stories, where maybe Doctor Who could be gay, or we hid VHS copies, for those who remember VHSs, and also books from our parents or checked out of the library in secret. But really, we didn't have that culture. Eventually, though, culture would be my way in. I found my label, or one that fit best, from the actor Alan Cumming. He talked about being bisexual, and if it was good enough for Alan Cumming, it felt like it was good enough for me at the time. We could all do worse than being a little bit less Alan Cumming, a little bit more Alan Cumming. And then later on, a play would be my way in to unlock a lot of that culture. In a fluorescent lit DVD rental store in a very snowy Canadian winter, my flatmate pointed to a DVD called Angels in America. She said, it's supposed to be good. It's supposed to be about AIDS. Not the most stellar sales pitch I will give her, but Montreal winters are long and cold and we were looking for something to watch. And that would be my way in. It's interesting to me still that the thing that was partly responsible for the silence of my childhood would be my way into that culture. I'd loop back around too to Alan Cumming a little bit later when I learned a bit of the history. I found out that he was in a play. I say found out, I saw him in a Pret in London, and I kind of realized he was around the corner from the place he was in a play in. I didn't follow him technically, but you know. And I saw a play that taught me more than a GCSE in history, an A-level, and by that point a degree in history had about queer history. It was a play called Bent by Martin Sherman, and it was about what happened to gay men in the Holocaust, another detail that was somehow omitted from my education. So I decided that culture and stories would be my way into the history that I'd lost along the way. Some might say a PhD in the subject was overkill, but a girl needs a hobby, I guess. And I would delve into it. But at 20 years old, that shouldn't have been the first time that I saw a story about queer history because we were bored one winter night and rented a DVD. When I was 22, Doctor Who came back to TV, and this is where it all kind of loops back around to me too. Because when Doctor Who came back in 2005, it was gay, or gayer, I should say, than Doctor Who had been originally. There were queer people in it, there were queer aliens in it, and if Doctor Who could be a little bit gay, then maybe there was more to investigate. But also I became very angry, concerned, confused, really, about what would have happened if I'd had Doctor Who being queer on my TV when I was younger? What if I hadn't had to wait 20 years to find a DVD and Doctor Who and all of these stories that had been hidden from me? I don't have to look like all the people in the stories either. I never particularly felt like the cool LA lesbians in things like The L Word. I never wanted to be the Victorian lesbians in Tip in the Velvet. I did clearly want to be Alan Cumming a little bit, and that's not too bad a thing to want to be. I was like Vince in Queer as Folk. I was a nerd who had, yes, sci-fi VHSs, and I wanted a life-size K9. I'm still waiting for someone to buy me a life-size K9. I didn't really have people who looked exactly like me, but slowly I found people under that rainbow who looked like me in TV, in film, in books, and yes, in the theatre. I found spaces where there were people who were versions of me or parts of me that would eventually give me the stories I'd missed. And I started unraveling those stories and realizing it is all connected. From Oscar Wilde through to, yes, things like Doctor Who, but also Schitt's Creek. Did you know that Schitt's Creek traces a line back to Christopher Isherwood, one of the first openly gay writers in America, who wrote the book that would eventually become the musical Cabaret, starring, yes, one Liza Minnelli, so yes, already quite camp, that then would be in the show about a queer couple getting married at the end in the form of Cabaret being in that show. These are the crazy kind of connections that my brain starts to make because I spent so long hunting for those connections. And yes, Alan Cumming gave me my first label because, well, I couldn't really find another one that fit. Later on, David Rose in Schitt's Creek made me think, hey, I'm a bit like that guy in more ways than one, some people might say. And hey, pansexual, that seems like a good label. Later on too, I then read books, which gave me my final label, because we like to collect them under the rainbow flag. A book that nobody else has really read called Upside Down let me know that I was the A in LGBTQIA, and dyslexics really struggle saying that acronym. I went through all of these labels, all of these pieces of culture to find out that yes, I did belong to a culture, as Larry Kramer said. Many, many years later, after doing, yes, far too much research, but, you know, I have an internet connection and I'm neurodivergent, what can I say? I was in the same theatre as Larry Kramer. I smiled across Larry Kramer across the theatre foyer before the reading of one of his plays, a play that would have been hidden from me decades before. And I thought, yes, Larry, I finally belong to a culture. And it's all connected, it's all important, whether it's plays about the AIDS crisis, whether it's activism in theatre, whether it's Alan Cumming, or yes, gay Doctor Who. Because imagine if we'd had all those stories when I was younger. Imagine we hadn't had to pretend that Oscar Wilde wasn't gay when we studied the importance of being earnest. Imagine we'd have been allowed to be as camp as we liked while performing the importance of being earnest. I certainly would have leaned into that one. But imagine we'd had those people, those individuals to tell us those stories and to tell us who we could be if we wanted to be, to give us our culture that had been denied to us for so long. That's why I keep talking about Doctor Who being gay when I say know your history, because it's all part of our history. And most importantly, can we make sure that nobody has to pretend to care about Leonardo DiCaprio and his stupid hair ever again?